It's Friday, December 6th. I'm Matt Harmon. Welcome to the Yahoo Fantasy Forecast presented by Toyota, the official automotive partner of the NFL. And it is one hell of a day to talk ball. And joining me to do just that is a very festive Andy Behrens. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see Andy's beautiful collection of decorations, making me look like an absolute jackass over here with my typical setup. Andy, what's going on, buddy?
I might just add a decoration every day. That's a possibility. Yeah. Feeling pretty festive. It's a great week ahead of us. The other, a thing that I like about this week is that we have some very clear spotlight games, like in the early window and then in the late window. I don't feel like I'm going to be torn. I know exactly what I want to see. This is a good week ahead.
Yeah, you think so? Because honestly, when I looked up the week 14 schedule to do my preview column, I was like, oh man, there's some real dusty games in the early portion.
There are some duds, but it really creates a hierarchy of games that is perfectly clear. I know exactly what I want to be zeroed in on, and like, am I going to be paying a lot of attention to the Jets and Dolphins? No, probably not live. Am I going to be paying a lot of attention to the Titans and Jags? No, probably not live. Although I have a perverse interest in that one, but yeah,
I think there's. You say that's.
I think there's some really clear spots that are incredibly fun games that I can just. I don't have to like do the red zone thing necessarily. I don't have to do like games on 4 screens. I can just lock in on a couple things that I am really excited to watch.
Something tells me that the email section of the recap show is going to be pretty hefty in week 14 with some. I mean, yeah. Saints, Giants. Do we really need eyeballs on that?
Wow.
We'll see. All right. On that note, let's get to our official business here that we do on the preview show. Every week, Andy Behrens joins me at the top of the show to provide 3 burning fantasy questions that he wants answered and 3 matchups that he says deserve your attention. And we've got a couple of good ones to spotlight there in that section. Then later in the back half of the show, Tera Roberts joins me to read off her make or break players for the week, and we finish it with our keys to winning. So, Andy, let's get into those 3 burning fantasy questions, starting with the team that's going to be playing your Chicago Bears this week, the San Francisco 49ers.
Yeah, I actually thought about building a question around Caleb Williams and the Bears, but then I thought, I need a week off. I need just a week to process, and we don't have to talk about that offense this week, but I do want to talk about the team on the other side. And the question is simply whether the Niners have sort of one last gasp in them, right? The next 3 matchups for that team are kind of winnable. It's Chicago, it's the Rams. That's obviously huge. Every division game there is huge. And then it's Miami. So there is a path to 8-7, which would set up a Monday night matchup with Detroit, right? Like another great game. There's also a path to this team being 6-9, and Brandon Allen is throwing passes to Pearsall and Jacob Cowing, and it could get really bad in a hurry. But I also assume that the Niners, the Niners were in the Super Bowl this calendar year, so I'm sure they don't go into matchups thinking, "Oh man, we can't win this one," or "This is going to be like." No, they show up thinking they're going to win, and they have a not crazy path to 8-7, and I would say that we need them. I don't know. It's still a too big to fail offense. Isaac Guerendo was the overwhelming top waiver ad this week. We're still trotting out George Kittle and Juwan Jennings, and I'm sure there's people still starting Deebo Samuel. I've got Brock Purdy in Superflex leagues. Like, we still need aspects of this offense to perform. But man, they're also they're 2 losses away from maybe packing it in.
Yeah. I don't know if they'll get to a full pack it in point, but maybe it's Brock Purdy, that shoulder injury. Let's let it rest up for a few more weeks, that type of thing. And you're right. I agree with you that it's a too big to fail offense, but it's too. There's just no ceiling to this group here. I'm not hoping for anything sort of like a ceiling outcome for Juwan Jennings. I know it's a snow game last week, but I feel like some of these 50-yard, 60-yard games are mostly what we're going to get from him going forward. I am excited about the Guerendo stuff, just because I think he fits like the typical mold of a Kyle Shanahan back. Maybe it's not the same way that they use Mason or McCaffrey or anything like that, but yeah, he was still somebody that people, I know I picked him up on a team and I'm going to start him right away, so I'm hoping for something here against your Bears. And I do think Guerendo on these perimeter runs, that matches up pretty well with the type of runs that Chicago's been vulnerable to. So, yeah, I don't know. If you had to guess, Andy, between the two like paths that you laid out there, we're 8-7, we're maybe kind of be interested in this matchup against the Lions, or the Brandon Allen path, like which one do you see more likely here?
Yeah, I honestly think it really comes down to that Rams game, right? And it should be tight and it's meaningful. And the Niners have also, like, it's just a weird Niners team that has found ways to lose games that don't seem losable. And so the idea of them coming off the Buffalo loss and then winning 3 in a row, while plausible, just does not feel like it's the DNA of this particular Niners team. And obviously they're missing some phenomenal playmakers. As much as I like Guerendo, and I do like him, I think he's more, he's also somebody who, like, when he gets space, when he gets an opening, he can really be gone, because he's that dude's fast, and it shows up on the field. I don't know that I don't think he has necessarily the vision that we saw from Jordan Mason, that we saw from obviously that McCaffrey's had his entire career. I don't think he's that guy, but there are clearly some big plays there. I don't know. I'd say the more likely path is the they fall to 7-8, 6-9. Once you've got 8 losses, you're no longer in control of your own situation, right? And things take a pretty bad turn. Purdy, we know, is playing through some stuff. Long, difficult season for Trent Williams. Nick Bosa is still dealing with a hip and oblique injury. So they've got some guys who are absolutely essential to how they win, who, if this season gets out of hand, are probably going to sit.
Yeah, and it's just a team that's been through so much this year.
Yes.
Personal life stuff, obviously really legit tragedies for multiple players. We've got like injuries, of course, all across the board. So just to me, I think they're going to get to a point where they just run out of gas. And it's not as if I agree with you. They come into every single week thinking, all right, we can be competitive. We can win this game. I think last week was a bit of an outlier with Purdy, coming off a shoulder injury in really rough conditions. I don't think every week's going to look quite that bad, but I give the Bears, the Rams, and the Dolphins these next 3 matchups. I'd give them like an equal, if maybe not even better chance to just outright beat this Niners team where they're at right now.
Yeah. Definitely possible. I would, personally, I would love to see Caleb Williams get the experience of actually winning a game. So I'm pulling for that. But a little part of me is also just wants the Niners to remain competitive and to think that they still have something in front of them. Because again, that's a team that, like, they're not looking at the Lions thinking, oh, we can't beat that team. I'm sure that the Niners still think they should and can beat anybody.
Yeah. Well, let's hope. After the season from hell, let's hope they still feel that way. All right, let's get to your second burning question here.
Yeah, it is. Are Isaiah Pacheco and Kareem Hunt really going to have a 50-50 split moving forward, which is what they had last week? Snaps and touches almost perfectly even a week ago. Production was not, because we got a big play from Isaiah Pacheco, because that is what he is sort of lab built to do. Part of me thinks, hopefully, that was just a proof of concept game for Pacheco, and he's got his legs under him now, and they're going to just absolutely unleash him at the end of the season. That should be the case. We've talked about it at many points throughout the year. Kareem Hunt has been getting it all done on volume. He's not particularly elusive at this stage, not a lot of yards after contact, usually goes down in the arms of the first person who arrives on the scene to tackle him. They're just not very similar ball carriers in any way. Obviously they trust Hunt. They trust him in pass protection. They trust him as a check down option. I got no problem with him seeing the field, but I find it weird that they would actually commit to playing him half of the snaps moving forward. But it isn't a huge open question. That's a really fun game. I didn't highlight Chargers and Chiefs in my 3 games to watch. But it obviously is a really fun matchup. Part of the reason I didn't highlight it is because all Chiefs games end the same way. We kind of know how it's going to go. Yeah. But there are opportunities against the Chargers, right? Like that has been a run defense that will give you some yards, and they're particularly attentive to the pass, and they will give up some yards. Haven't given up a lot of rushing touchdowns, but there are opportunities there. They give up over 4.5 yards per carry. So, man, if we could get 20 plus touches for Isaiah Pacheco here, that's a hell of a week. But I need to see it first.
I think he could make your fantasy lineup just on like 15 touches, even if he could. I think it will not be 50-50. I'd be shocked if it's 50-50 in the next like 3 weeks, basically. But I think Hunt will still be involved. And I think Hunt will probably never get fully phased out, because it's kind of exactly what you said there. It's that this interior of the offensive line is so good. They have issues at tackle, no question. But the interior, like guard, center guard, is really good. And as long as Hunt can just run up the gut and get exactly what's blocked, I think he makes for an ideal complement to Pacheco, who is already a little bit more volatile as a runner, probably will be a little bit more volatile as he works back from this injury. So, all right, hey, we need to give Pacheco a blow. We can give Hunt like 5 to 7 carries a game, and we know he's probably not losing us yards on those carries. So I don't think he will ever be completely phased out, but I'd be shocked if it was a 50-50 split. And I like the way that you highlighted how Pacheco matches up potentially with this Chargers run defense, which is generally pretty steady. But I think because of just how they play the run stylistically with all those light boxes and the guys dedicated to coverage on the back end, they're probably susceptible to a couple of gashes here. So Pacheco, that's what he needs. He needs to have those big plays, whereas Kareem Hunt's not getting you those big plays. So I don't know. How do you feel like Pacheco as a fantasy option this week? Where do you kind of have him at?
I have him all over the place, right? Because I came into this season, he was sort of one of my pound the table guys. And I do think that had he not been injured, this would have been a huge Isaiah Pacheco season, right? Just given the workloads that we've seen from Kareem Hunt. I think that was going to be a right answer, but hey, that's the nature of the NFL. So I'm playing him in a lot of places. I can think of one league where I am not, because again, there is a little bit of an open question about the usage. I've got him in the mid-teens. I still think, as you said, if we just get 12 touches, 15 touches from Isaiah Pacheco, 1 or 2 or 3 of those are really going to pop. And I just think, again, he's a completely different runner from Kareem Hunt. I also I don't know, every time I talk about Kareem Hunt, I sort of admire what he has been able to do this season. He's come in off the street, seen huge workloads. He is an almost entirely mistake-free back. You know, there's a lot of things that you can understand a coaching staff liking about Kareem Hunt. He's going to do the thing that we've designed on this play. He's going to hit the hole as it is drawn up, and he just doesn't. There's not a lot of whiffs from him. There's not a lot of mistakes from him. Ball security not an issue. I totally get why a coaching staff likes him. I just imagine Isaiah Pacheco as a 70 to 75% of the snaps kind of guy, and then Kareem Hunt as a rotational player. That's what I would think the Chiefs would be trying to get to, and maybe they are, because again, Pacheco had a pretty significant injury, and if you think about the amount of downtime that he must have had, time off feet, I'm sure it's quite a road back, and to try to do that within the context of an NFL season is really tough.
Yeah, I'm glad you said something nice about Kareem Hunt, because I think for most of the year it's been just so obvious to point out that he's been so he just has been not a successful player or he's not getting more than what's there. He's doing the absolute minimum with what's there. So I think that's been an easy thing to point out, and kind of the frustration of I also was into Pacheco this year. I didn't draft him into a lot of places, but I agree with you. I think that would have been one of the right answers. And it's just, if Pacheco didn't get hurt, would Kareem Hunt even be on an NFL roster right now? This was probably the one team that was going to give him a call. And by the way, Kareem Hunt's not some sob story, so I don't mean to paint him as oh no, Kareem Hunt or anything like that. We really need to be nicer to old Kareem Hunt. But I mean, he pretty obviously fell off in 2022, and then the only reason he was really back with the Browns in 23 was because of Nick Chubb's injury, and that's just kind of the way he's gone the last couple of years. So I agree. I think we'd love to just see more of Pacheco and him getting rolling here. I would kind of confidently start Pacheco. We all have him kind of ranked around that running back 23-ish, running back 20 sort of range. He's definitely somebody to start this week. By the way, I was just looking at our consensus rankings. Would you like to guess who's the highest on Isaac Guerendo this week? And would you like to guess how high that individual ranker is on Isaac Guerendo?
I have not looked at them this week. I am going to assume that Dalton Del Don is the highest on Guerendo. Top 12?
9. Running back 9.
That feels right. Yeah, that feels right.
That feels right. I mean, he's honestly, like I said, I had to pick him up in one league where I'm in first place and start him immediately. So how the hell am I in first place? I don't know. Great question, but I'm probably playing him right off the jump. So I hope Dalton is right on this one. And Dalton is sometimes he's often right, when he gets over excited about these young players.
By the way, like small aside, this is why Dalton's ranks are so useful, and mine, which are kind of hedgy, are probably not. Like you can just absolutely see with perfect clarity how Dalton feels about a guy, and I'll sit there and I'll be like, well, in the best case scenario, this happens, but there's also this to account for and RB 18 or whatever. But man, if Dalton has an inkling on somebody, he is way up there. And if Dalton is down on someone, he is way down there. Like he really expresses things in his ranks in a way that, some of us old timers do not.
Well, two things. One, rubber stamp, 100% agree with everything you just said. And two, if we're getting into a conversation about utility of our rankings, I'm going to quickly change the subject. So all right, with that said, Andy, let's get to your third burning fantasy question here today.
Yeah. Can the Bengals, can they just please win one game that they are supposed to win? Joe Burrow's season has been just outrageously good. The team still has 4 wins, which is crazy. We mentioned it last week. They are 2-4 in games in which they score 30 points, which is just stupid. If they lose one more game, then they got to start thinking about shutting people down. They're in that Niners situation, right? Where there's just not like, we're one more loss away from that's kind of it. And I can't stress enough how everybody knows it, but how ridiculously good Joe Burrow's season has been. One way to think about this, and this is something that I wrote for the newsletter this week, just in terms of talking to people about how to, when we're streaming defenses, what is our decision-making process and what should we be looking at? And the point that I was trying to make is that like all we really care about are, how many dropbacks are likely to happen from the opposing quarterback, right? And so you can look at the 10 or 12 teams that have attempted the most passes this season. They are also almost without exception the 10 or 12 teams that have given up the most fantasy points to opposing defenses, right? Because scoring is driven by sacks, it's driven by pick sixes, it's driven by interceptions. Those things only happen when a quarterback drops back. So even if it's a bad team that doesn't throw a lot, they're probably not going to give up a lot of fantasy points. The lone exception to that is Joe Burrow. They throw a ton, and he's been damn near perfect. I think he's only been intercepted like 5 times. He's just having a filthy season, and it's not going to get remembered because they can't win, because they can't hold anybody under like 35. Just a wild season. I don't want anything to derail this Cincinnati offense, but we're probably coming up on a time when, I don't know, T. Higgins has been playing through some stuff. He's headed into free agency. If they are mathematically out of it, how much more T. Higgins do we get? Some guys along the line could get shut down. It's a concern.
It's definitely a concern. Before we tap in on that, I do just want to note that I think this is a great test for the Cowboys defense, because we talked about it yesterday on the film room with Nate, that this is a defense that since week 8 is a top 10 defense. And because they've gotten a lot of their guys back, as Colin noted yesterday, this is the first time they're going to have a ton of their players all together all season. They're some of their most important players. So it's definitely, I think this defense, which has some matchups for some players we care about a lot down the stretch, we're going to learn a lot in this one, because if the Bengals can put up like another 30-point banger, well, maybe I'm starting to question that top 10 defensive ranking from the Cowboys, and how much of that is influenced by some of the recent opponents and things like that. Regardless, though, I think this was like a joke of a defense to start the year. I don't think it's a joke anymore. Maybe it's not quite top 10, but I think it's a unit that, maybe we're not just like start everybody against them. You are probably starting everybody against them this week with the Cincinnati Bengals, but I love your point about this, Andy. Like when do we start getting concerned about business decisions being made here? You know, they haven't extended Chase. That didn't happen to begin the year. T. Higgins obviously is on the franchise tag. If I'm T. Higgins, I'm looking across, the country there to Brandon Ayuk and what happened with him. If he didn't secure the bag already, this would be like a disaster for Ayuk with a ligament knee injury. T. Higgins' big question is probably like, can he play a full 17 games? I'm not trying to test that theory down the stretch.
Yeah. Again, like they're so close to like a 9th loss. You get that 9th loss, and you're just not. There's no path. They lose this game, and there is no path to the playoffs. And I can't even formulate the case for T. Higgins to play all the way, to run all the way through the tape in a season like that.
Right. By the way, if they win this game, Next Gen Stats playoff probability bumps them up to a 4% chance. So even if they win this game, sick. I'm pretty. I don't know if I want to say concerned about the potential, like, all right, Higgins, packs it in, or Chase. I don't know if Chase can realistically pack it in. I think that I don't know. He's an interesting guy, but he's also like potentially up for the Triple Crown this year, which is crazy.
Yes.
Our last Triple Crown winner was Cooper Kupp, and they won the damn Super Bowl, and Chase is in contention to win the Triple Crown, and they're not even going to make the damn playoffs, are the Bengals this year. So it's a real shame that, you're right, these are some pretty impressive offensive seasons that are just never going to be remembered.
Yeah, I mean, Burrow's leading the league in everything that matters, right? Like, he has a really good chance to lead the league in passing yards and passing touchdowns. Chase has a shot at the Triple Crown, and they're a bad team. That's wild.
Yeah. It's cool too for Jamar Chase. Just last nerd note before we toss to break, that I always come back to that conversation I had with him at the Super Bowl, and him wanting to learn to be used in multiple positions, and him really needing to work more at it. It feels like all of that really came to fruition for him this year, where he's been used in all these different ways, and he's thriving in it, and he's going to lead the league in receiving yards and touchdowns and maybe receptions too, although CeeDee Lamb is close there, and with the PPR scam that's going on in Dallas, he might end up leading the league in receptions in a weird way, in a very strange season there. Still, it's like all of that's going to come to fruition, and just absolutely none of it matters. It's really a shame.
Yeah. I don't know if you're watching Hard Knocks in season. I don't usually watch a lot of television during NFL season. There's only so much time, but I thought it was an interesting concept. And man, watching Mike Tomlin just review film and talk up Jamar Chase, just in a coach's meeting, and watching him talk up Joe Burrow, it just sort of underscored the superhero level seasons that those guys are having.
Again, such a shame that it really doesn't matter. I don't have a ton of time to watch television during the NFL season, and the time that I do have is mostly spent, 99.9% is spent with my wife, who is definitely not watching in-season Hard Knocks.
Fair.
And frankly, I probably get enough football during the football season that I don't need to be all right, let's use my TV time for more football. All the good clips you see on social media anyways, but that is a good note, Andy. All right, with that said, let's toss the break. When we come back, we'll talk through the 3 matchups that Andy says deserve your attention right after this. All right, we're back. Andy, we got 3 matchups that you say the people need to be paying attention to, starting with Falcons at Vikings. I have a feeling I know where you're going to go with this particular matchup.
Oh, hell yeah. Obviously, this whole game is about Kirk Cousins. But it is kind of wild that, there is a first place team in this game, and it is not the one that is 10-2, right? Atlanta's 6-6, point differential of -34 on the season, currently sitting in first place in the division. We talked about it, the last time we potted together. Kirk Cousins basically has those 2 Tampa Bay games that have delivered all of the stats. He was just abysmal last week, and I thought, on rewatch, it was even worse than what we were seeing in real time. Really no zip on the throws, a lot of throws late. He seemed kind of flummoxed. He seemed just a beat slow. Really rough watch. And he is, of course, now facing a defense that ranks first in interceptions, that ranks fourth in sacks, that is, sometimes almost feels like the Vikings are agnostic to yards against, right? But they are playing for like game-changing moments and drive-killing moments, and they get them, and they're really good at getting them. And there can't possibly be a team that knows Kirk Cousins any better than the Minnesota Vikings and this coaching staff. So I'm almost scared for him. Like, it's just, there's so many fun storylines here, but they all just sort of lead back to Cousins.
Yeah, I talked about it with Sal on the Data Dump show. I tweeted out the clip too. What you think when watching this team, that, oh man, they struggle against zone coverage, and those windows start to seem to close really fast against the Chargers last week. The numbers play that out. I mean, he's Kirk Cousins is really good throwing against man coverage, and he's abysmal throwing against zone coverage. And when you take out those two games against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Andy, who is the most zone coverage heavy team in the league, he becomes like worse than Daniel Jones, worse than Will Levis, worse than Bryce Young on the season. He gets into the territory from an adjusted net yards per attempt standpoint to like Jacoby Brissett or Tyler Huntley. That's what Kirk Cousins is throwing against zone coverage if you remove those Tampa Bay games this year. 1 touchdown to 9 interceptions on the season. It's brutal. And the Vikings play a bunch of zone coverage. The reason they get these teams to throw a bunch of sacks, or excuse me, to throw a bunch of interceptions, is because of all the pressure they put on you up front and all the funky kind of zone looks. So it's just such a rough matchup for the Falcons. What they have done poorly this year and what the Vikings do well, like, directly lines up against each other. So I don't know. I mean, and there's a lot of players we got to counter here. Like I think we saw last week, Kirk Cousins can, pee all down his pants, and Drake London can still get home with like 80 yards. But, the Darnell Mooney stuff, maybe that becomes a little tougher as the more vertical receiver. I don't know, man. Maybe I'm overreacting, but I am a little concerned about Cousins' return to Minnesota here.
No, I don't know how you can trust any element of that receiving core other than Drake London. It's certainly not Kyle Pitts, right?
Oh, yeah.
Nobody at this point, in all likelihood, has Kyle Pitts inside their top 10, top 12 fantasy tight ends. That's just not happening. I don't think, the level at which Kirk was playing last week, it was a small miracle that Drake London still made it through, with a tolerable fantasy day. There's just no way he can support 2 startable fantasy receivers. And I hope that's not like the version of Kirk Cousins that we just simply get moving forward. I hope that was just, match up against a tough, smart defense. But man, we got another one here, and he's just got to survive it. You can't play him. I mean, you can't play him in Superflex. Like, I think that's where we are going into this one, based on what we just saw, and the possibility here of, another like 3 turnover game is just so strong. Obviously the Vikings defense, I think, a really strong start here. We'll see. Kirk also knows Minnesota as well as anybody possibly can. So maybe there's some hope. Should probably also mention that, and I know I say this all the time, but Bijan Robinson is just having an absolutely filthy year and can be started under any circumstance, and is coming off a 32 touch game. And it almost doesn't matter the quality of the opposing defense. He's getting the kind of volume, and he's doing the kind of ridiculous things that are just, I don't know. Nobody has his highlights other than like Saquon and Bucky Irving, and then it's Bijan Robinson.
Yeah, absolutely. He's definitely going to be in contention, I think, for the top pick next year, just where he's at in his kind of like career as a running back. It's funny, some of those names I mentioned, like, oh, he becomes this guy, in terms of his throws against zone coverage, like Will Levis and Bryce Young. I might rather start those dudes in Superflex this week ahead of Kirk Cousins, even though Bryce Young is in a pretty terrible matchup against that Eagles defense there. But regardless, I hope that we're doing the same thing that we did after week 1, which is absolutely freak out about a bad Kirk Cousins game and start to talk about Michael Penix, and then he kind of shuts us up, just because we care so much about these pass catchers, and the Falcons have a great opportunity to, I don't want to say moonwalk to a division lead, or to a division win, but just win your damn games, and you have the tiebreakers over the Bucs. So hopefully this all goes away. It's just, again, it matches up so poorly there on that side. So we shall see what happens in that. Anything on the Viking side, or is it just kind of business as usual?
Yeah, I think we know what to do on the Vikings side, right? And I don't want to relitigate Justin Jefferson's season. I think he's awesome. I don't have anything bad to say about Justin Jefferson. there have been some hiccups from Aaron Jones, but I think he's fully trustworthy here. Again, like against Atlanta's defense, we can roll out all these guys, especially with 6 teams on bye.
All right, let's get to your next game here, which is divisional matchup, Browns at Steelers.
Oh, I love this game. First of all, the last time we saw these teams, it was just a joy of a game. It was the absolutely delightful snow globe game a couple weeks ago. And then last week, these two quarterbacks, frickin' Jameis Winston and Russell Wilson, current version of Russell Wilson, these guys combined for 911 passing yards, 7 passing touchdowns, 3 pick sixes. Let's go. Like this game is so fun.
It looks like a Big 12 line there, Andy, the combined passing yards.
Oh my gosh. You can start both defenses in this one. I don't know. Like I actually the pick six on Russ's side was not entirely on him, I don't think. Pickens kind of got dragged to the ground. No call there. Whatever. Really, really fun stat lines from both players a week ago. I think we can feel pretty comfortable in Russell Wilson. We can't feel comfortable with Jameis Winston, but he does have the potential of a 30-point week anytime you roll him out there.
Yeah, and we know which ancillary pass catchers we're into in this one. I don't know if we're going to get Cedric Tillman in this game. He's still in the concussion protocol as the time we tape this, which obviously is unfortunate. He's a player that was really kind of starting to take off and then runs into that snow game and gets the concussion, and we haven't seen him since, of course. But if he's not in the picture, that does really clarify. I tweeted this during the Broncos game. Nothing hits quite like a Jameis Winston receiver core that gets condensed down to 2 guys. When we get it condensed down to 2 guys, I mean, Elijah Moore is going to get a bunch of targets. Jerry Jeudy, this is something we don't talk about. Jerry Jeudy was 3rd on that team in targets on Monday night. What? He had 235 yards. He was 3rd on the team in targets because Njoku was still getting his. Elijah Moore was getting some passes, some pretty great catches from him in that game. And it's difficult because this is another situation just like the Broncos matchup, Andy, where the Steelers have a real, he's not as good as Pat Surtain, but a good perimeter corner who can, one-on-one lock you up in Joey Porter Jr., but you can kind of get the other guys in the receiver room. He also doesn't travel much into the slot. So what the Browns did last week was basically like, okay, Tillman's out. We're not going to move Jerry Jeudy to X or Elijah Moore to flanker and bump up like Jamari Thrash to slot. We're going to just make Michael Woods. I got nothing for you on Michael Woods, but he was their X receiver on Monday night who basically just got like sacrificed to Surtain. And I feel like we could see something similar here this week.
Yeah. This one just absolutely fun. I can't wait for it. Jameis was, I don't know. Jameis was just such a journey and also a joy a week ago. That was really fun. Divisional matchup. So like, you don't know exactly what is coming at you. I don't think anybody expected the Browns to get a win a couple of weeks ago. But that is definitely in play. I mean, we have, we have certainly relearned this season because I got way ahead of myself with the Ravens Steelers matchup earlier this year, right? Like the divisional games, especially in this division, can get weird in a hurry. I don't even know. I don't have it in front of me, like what percentage of Jerry Jeudy's lifetime, like career NFL yardage was gained last week, but it's not trivial. It's, like Jerry Jeudy having a whole ass career with Jameis Winston as his quarterback over like 4 or 5 weeks is just crazy. And sort of rewriting his own story on the fly has just been really fun.
I have those numbers thanks to our friend Rotopat, Pat Doherty. This is after the Monday night game. Jerry Jeudy has 14%. The final tally, 15.6% of 5th-year pro Jerry Jeudy's career production has come in the 5 games since Jameis Winston took over as the Browns starter 36 days ago. This guy's been in the league for a minute, and 36 days worth of his time in the NFL has accounted for 15+% of his production.
Yeah, just absolutely wild, and that's. I mean, credit Jameis, right? And Jameis will also, again, I can't underscore this enough, like Pittsburgh's defense is a very strong candidate to finish number 1 this week overall, while also potentially giving up, I don't know, 27 points. Like that wouldn't shock me if they give up a huge point total and still finish as the number 1 overall defense for the week. Jameis is just, he's just an incredible gift for fantasy.
And obviously last time we saw these two teams go against each other was literally a beautiful game because of the snow.
Yeah.
Let me step into weather bro territory here, a place in which I'm not qualified to talk about, but thanks to AccuWeather. No, it's a free plug, AccuWeather, the GOAT of weather apps and such.
Great buzz marketing for AccuWeather. Wow, they need it.
Yeah, you are welcome, AccuWeather. Okay, high of 50 degrees on Sunday in Pittsburgh. Milder, a little breezy in the morning, maybe a couple showers late. 50 degrees, Andy. We're not getting another snow game here, so that could really that could push the passing production up in this game, which I think we're both looking forward to seeing. Let's get to your final matchup here. Another division contest, another rematch that we just saw, similar to the game we just talked about. Seahawks at Cardinals.
Yeah, this one is particularly interesting, really, just because this is as close as we can get in week 14. Like, we still have 5 games ahead of us, right? But this is pretty close to a win and you're in, loser goes home scenario. The swing in playoff odds for each team based on the outcome of this game is pretty incredible. And they're a little bit different at all the places, right? But it's, it goes pretty quickly from, I think in Seattle's case, they have about 70% playoff odds if they win this game, and they're below 20 if they lose it, which is, again, it's wild because then there's still 4 games left. But that's where they're at. And this division is so muddled. Everybody's clustered, around a 500 record. These are also 2 teams where, I have no idea which version of the Cardinals is going to show up in any given week. I have no idea which version of Geno Smith and the Seahawks is going to show up in any given quarter. And that guy can have, we have talked about this at several points, that guy will routinely make 1 or 2 throws a game that you are like, what could he have possibly seen? How did it come out of his hand that way? That is one of the worst things I've seen. And then everything else is spotless.
Yeah.
So he's wild. And then Kyler Murray, of course, has had this season and we've also discussed this, it's either 25 plus fantasy points or it's fewer than 15 fantasy points. And there's just not been a lot of in between for him. The last time they met, it kind of got decided by Kyler throwing just an absolutely horrible ball. One of the worst that we've seen this year. He's got to avoid that. We've got the weird Trey McBride storyline where he's coming up on 100 targets and he's got 70 catches and he doesn't have a touchdown yet through the air. That's crazy. He's also, he's been targeted 27 times over his last 2 games. He's got 24 catches in his last 2 games. He sees a bunch of work in the red zone. So it's just a wild fluke that he hasn't scored yet. And I'm sure it's going to happen at some point. This is a fun one, though, because we have, the Cardinals are easy from a fantasy perspective. You start Connor, you start Harrison, you start McBride. You're probably still starting Kyler Murray, even though that's a ride. We have at least some concern over the health of Kenneth Walker in Seattle's backfield right now. He's dealing with a couple things. He's dealt with a bunch of a medley of injuries throughout the year. So we'll see. Might get a little bit more Zach Charbonnet. The receiving core is good. DK Metcalf still dinged. Again, both quarterbacks to some extent are agents of chaos. And this is a super meaningful game within the division.
Yeah. Shout out to Scott. He's always, of course, our colleague, our buddy, Scott Pianowski. He's always looking for the next Jacoby Myers, Deontay Johnson every single year at wide receiver. This year, it's Trey McBride at tight end, which I never would have thought, getting all of absurd amount of targets and not scoring a touchdown. That's got to happen at some point. Like you said, it's pretty much just bad luck. No other reason there for that other than just some of the volatility of the passing game, which you're so right to point at the volatility of both of these passing games. The fact that last time we saw these 2 teams match up, Seattle absolutely shut down Arizona's ground game. Seattle's ground game is one of the more pitiful of the last month plus here. And by the way, both of these defenses were also in the episode we talked about yesterday where they're kind of these second half surgers. I mean, the Seahawks in the back half of the year are 3rd in EPA per play allowed. The Cardinals are in the top 8. And so, yeah, Andy, because of these 2 offenses and because there's talented players on both sides and the quarterbacks, when they get hot, they can be really electric players. I could see this game turning into kind of a really exciting fantasy game. But because of the way they also can just go into the dirt, and also the way these defenses kind of can drive you into the dirt, I could also see this game being another, kind of 17 to, what was it, like 17-6 outing that the Seahawks won last time.
Yeah, this could be a weird score game too. Like they just play, I don't know. These are really, really funny teams. So we could get we could get 15-14, we get 16-13, we could get some weird number here. But you're so right. Like there's a lot of talent on the field, and a lot of people that are capable of just game breaking, field flipping plays. We could also get 30-27, and this thing could be a joy. And I'm bad at predicting which version of Kyler Murray is going to show up. I've got a league in which I just go ahead and start him each week, and you can track my winning and losing based on whether it's a big Kyler week or whether it's not.
Yeah, I have at least one Marvin Harrison Jr. Kyler Murray stack team that seemed like that was one of those, ooh, what a fun idea in August, and it's become pretty much nothing short of one of my least favorite things that I've experienced all year long. God, Harrison was that pick in the second round, at least for me, that I don't want to make this pick. I really don't, but it's one of these wide receiver heavy leagues, and then it's am I clicking on him or Devon? The good thing is it's who was I clicking on that I really that I could have clicked on that I missed out on? Ooh, I didn't get Devontae Adams. Oh, nuts. I didn't get Chris Olave. Oh, nuts. But that's the story that you have to tell yourself, because otherwise this is the type of matchup that from a schematic standpoint that Marvin Harrison Jr. should be able to get going on these outside corners, but that stuff has just been so inconsistent this year for, pretty much everybody involved has been the system. Harrison and Kyler Murray are kind of all at fault for the up and down production there. I will say JSN is 11th in yards per route run against man coverage on the season, not just in the back half. And as I highlighted yesterday, the Cardinals have played a ton of man coverage on late downs. One of the only team over 50% in the back half of the year playing man coverage on late downs, third and fourth down, which has also been the down that Gino has been looking for JSN. So I think he's obviously somebody you're starting, but this could be yet another spike week for JSN.
Yeah, another thing to keep in mind here, and this is, there's some noise in this, and we're talking about multiple coaching staffs, and we're talking about different personnel over the years, but DK Metcalf has a horrible history against the Cardinals, and he didn't pop in the last game either. And again, there's a lot of noise there, but they have turned him over the years consistently into a pretty ordinary receiver. So I do have him buried in the ranks a little bit. They have over the years, they have just made some decisions about how we're going to focus on DK Metcalf that makes him pretty quiet. And so historically, if we get 50 plus yards from DK Metcalf against Arizona, it's a really good game by his standards.
All right, Andy. Those are some good games that we talked through. There are obviously some bad games we'll be talking through on Sunday. So can't wait to get you back here after the dust settles. Appreciate you for this one. And hey, I'm also rooting for your Bears to end the Niners season this week.
Thank you. I at once don't want the Niners season to end, but I do want the Bears to experience winning at some point.
That would be nice. And that's the holiday, that's the Christmas spirit that I'm giving you there on that one. Because I am a known, just dripping, just exuding.
Talked about it before the show. You radiate Christmas spirit. Yep.
Many people say that about me. All right. With that, Andy, we will say goodbye to you. You'll be back on Sunday after the dust settles, as I mentioned. For now, we'll take a break. When we come back, Tera Roberts will join us to highlight her make or break players for Week 14 right after this. Joining us now, as she does every week here on the preview show, it is Tera Roberts. Tera, missed you last week. I hope your Thanksgiving was good. What's going on?
Thanksgiving was amazing. Food was delicious, as cooked by me, with the exception of the turkey. Yes, I couldn't cook that. I don't have those skills.
Well, hey, Tera, we'll get you up to speed on that. Don't worry, but keep going.
Thank you. It's because I like a fried turkey, and me with the idea of an oil fryer. That's not a good idea. I will burn stuff down. Yes, but other than that, fantastic. I'm ready for the fantasy playoffs. I'm excited here.
Excellent. Yeah, I have never made my way into the deep fried turkey game either. I'm a smoked turkey guy myself because that's my wheelhouse. So yeah, but we'll sort you out on the turkey stuff maybe for next year, hopefully. But unless you want to do the deep frying thing, then you're in God's hands, not mine on that one. All right. Let's get into it here, as we always do. Make or break players for Week 14. Like you mentioned, fantasy playoffs are right around the corner. People are trying to win and in this week. This is big stuff. We got a lot of teams on bye, so it's not as if just the full deck is available here, Tara. We've got to really try to nail some of these players. Let's get it started with your first make or break player, which I cannot believe the amount of times this particular man has showed up in the outlines every single week, every single day this week on the show, and that is Titans quarterback Will Levis.
It is Will Levis week. Yeah, it's funny because we've dealt with bye weeks before, but I feel like I've never gone into the real scrubby type of players here. But this bye week in particular, with the amount of quarterbacks that are high-end quarterbacks that we have on a bye, yes, we are absolutely scraping here to the point where Will Levis has just risen up the rankings. I mean, by the time we get to the actual game, I would not be shocked if he's literally sitting at QB 13 or something as we start to push forward and trust him, because he is one of the better streaming options this week. Perhaps my favorite streaming option this week when we're looking at all of the low-end quarterbacks that have potentially high upside matchups. Will Levis is the only guy from my perspective and from the numbers that actually has a stable floor. And I know it feels weird to say that he is stable. The turnovers will come. He will be chaotic. Winning the game is going to be interesting here, even against Jacksonville. But at the end of the day, he throws touchdowns. He throws for volume. And the kind of weird thing that I found within his numbers, when he throws for volume and over 30 passing attempts, he still completes essentially over the past 4 weeks, essentially 18 completions. When he throws for under 25 attempts, he still completes 18 efficiencies and somehow becomes wildly efficient. I don't know what is going on with him and why that is happening. But from our perspective, that's a good thing because it means that we know exactly what we can expect from him. And that's where the stable floor is coming from. And he also has this receiving core that is stepping up now. We know that Calvin Ridley is fantastic when volume is pushed his way. We've also got Nick Westbrook-Akine that we're now leaning into and trusting his little touchdown machine over there. So from that perspective, the running backs, are talented. There's a lot going on here that Will Levis has to work with. So in a matchup with Jacksonville, a defense that does in fact allow good volume to opposing quarterbacks, this is a situation where Will Levis can provide us both a stable floor and QB1 upside. So when I'm looking at him this week, I don't feel super uncomfortable with it. I'm not afraid to lean into it.
God, what a world. What a world we live in. Yeah, Calvin Ridley is 9th among qualified receivers in yards per route run against man coverage. Pretty wild stuff. He's obviously just really flipped the script on his season from the early Will Levis section here. And I think Will Levis has flipped the script a little bit too. I mentioned it on the show yesterday that over the last 4 weeks, he's right there with Jordan Love and Jared Goff and Jameis Winston in terms of yards per attempt. And I think some of those low attempt games that you mentioned, there's probably just that the games are a little closer. I mean, I would imagine that might have something to do with it. And said you probably don't want Will Levis in negative game script, right? Yeah. Where he's trying to throw his way out of the game because he's just chucking it, that's what he wants to do, right? He wants to push the ball down the field, but maybe some of these more positive game scripts can lead to his better instincts, or at least avoid the absolute, him slamming the disaster button, which hopefully this game against Mac Jones and the Jaguars we should probably see that in this one. So I like it. I mean, look, you mentioned the guys on bye week. No Bo Nix, no Anthony Richardson. If you've been getting freaky with Drake May, he's not in the mix here. The Commanders and Jaden Daniels, Lamar Jackson, obviously. If you've somehow been slamming your head against the wall with C.J. Stroud all year long, you don't have to do it this week because they're on bye. So a lot of big name quarterbacks, pretty much all quarterbacks that are in that kind of starting range here. So yeah, I don't know. Give me a rough. You said You said kind of roughly maybe top 12 quarterback by the time the games actually kick off. Are there any bigger names or names kind of on that fringes that people might be surprised that you'd rather start Will Levis over?
Maybe Sam Darnold kind of makes me a little bit uncomfortable Because whereas we get into a weird situation sometimes with him and with this Atlanta defense here, maybe that's someone. Now, I'm not committed to it. I do have Sam Darnold ranked higher right now, but he is a weird one where he can essentially throw up a game where he has limited upside and multiple interceptions. He's got a very talented group to go with, but he is a little bit shakier. Maybe Caleb Williams with the injury to DJ Moore, that could kind of flip things here. So I can see it where we can push him up more. I've definitely got him ahead of Brock Purdy already here with everything that is going on, the matchup not being ideal for him. So that's kind of the range that he's sitting in and kind of tossing around people that he could push ahead of. Not ranking it that way right now. But as we get closer here and we start to see these injury situations shake out, it could turn that way.
Yeah, honestly, that makes a ton of sense to me, and I think he's kind of in that range. If you have in Superflex, like I'd like to be starting Will Levis this week. Okay, let's go to your next name here, which is Los Angeles Chargers running back Gus Edwards.
Gus Edwards. Yeah, it's we were waiting here. We get J.K. Dobbins. He made it as long as he could, thank goodness. But unfortunately, injury comes, and you think, okay, well, it's time to turn to Gus Edwards. And unfortunately, the way that it's shaken out there, I don't know if he is super reliable. I mean, we know what it is with Gus Edwards. He is an early down back. He will have goal line opportunities, not going to give you any receiving upside. And when you're looking at that backfield, his competition is Kamani Vidal, Hassan Haskins as well. But when you're looking at the numbers from last week, yes, he was the clear RB1, but it was still kind of messy. The numbers were skewed by the fact that they didn't run. At the same time, they didn't really pass. It was just such a low volume game all around where nobody within that Chargers offense actually succeeded. But now we turn around and we've got another matchup that is potentially difficult here, absolutely difficult in Kansas City. And I don't know if we have any more further clarity on what this backfield will look like, because it's another instance where whoever is carrying the load is going to have, low volume, unfortunately, because yardage just doesn't come against that Kansas City defense on the ground. But there is a little upside here. Now, one, the fact that, again, we have so many teams on a bye. Gus Edwards is absolutely pushed into that borderline RB2 range. It feels like I don't want him there, but even if you look at people ranked behind him, you don't trust anyone. Once you get past a certain point, you're just saying, okay, this is a weird situation where I'm starting players that I have zero confidence in. I've had people ask me if it's okay to start Jonathan Brooks this week, and you answer and you're like, well, given your options here, you might have to turn that direction and not feel a lot of shame for it, unfortunately. So looking at Dobbins, at the very least, he's got goal line opportunities. We do know that the pass is viable against Kansas City. So we could get a decent amount of goal line opportunities. Obviously, injury to Ladd McConkey would maybe affect things there, but he's at least practicing. So we'll wait to see how that shakes out. But if they can push and get a little back and forth here and provide those goal line opportunities, Gus Edwards does offer a little upside. He can get you into that 10 to 15 fantasy point range with some touchdown opportunities to add on to that little bit of yardage there. So looking at the rankings, you have to feel mildly okay with starting him based off the fact that it is a matchup where he could have goal line opportunities, based off the fact that he does appear to be the lead back. It's not ideal, but it is one of those weeks where unfortunately you might be trying to scrape by with a guy like Gus Edwards.
You said that so perfectly, where it's Gus Edwards is kind of my last guy ranked, and it's like, hey, if you gotta, I mean, I don't want you to, but if you gotta do it, he's probably the last kind of like palatable option. You're not totally banged if you gotta start Gus Edwards, but you're like banged adjacent basically if you're starting Gus Edwards, because you're right that it's really about the goal line equity and if this game can get a little higher scoring, and the fact that the Chiefs haven't really run away from anybody all year. They obviously took it down to the wire against the damn Raiders last week. Like, I think the Chargers can compete in this game. Ultimately, I think that's what you're hoping for here. You're hoping for some of that touchdown equity, but you mentioned like you can get the Chiefs in the passing game. Yes. Obviously, Ladd McConkey would be a big part of that, particularly because he thrives in the areas where the Kansas City Chiefs have been weakest in the secondary. That also might make sense and apply to your next player here, which is another Charger. This one in the passing game, it's Will Dissly.
Yeah, he's not the only Charger that we care about this week. We're trying to make it work here across all positions. So we've got a potential tight end streaming option that could be on waivers. For a while, people were feeling very comfortable with streaming him. He was seeing some volume there. Now a 0 fantasy point performance often will kick you immediately to waivers as people are panicking on that. So if you're looking for a streaming option, Will Dissly might be available for you to turn to here. And we're talking about the matchup here against Kansas City, where they have to lean on the pass in this matchup. Now, Ladd McConkey dealing with the injury, even if he does play, potential limitations there. We also know that this is an area where Dissly would potentially excel, even with McConkey there. Tight ends have done decently well against Kansas City as well. So profile-wise, McConkey or not, this is definitely somewhere where we could turn. And if for some reason we didn't get McConkey, good Lord, I just don't see a scenario where we would be pushing 15 targets Quentin Johnston's way. I think they would be forced to go back to pushing volume to Will Dissly as a more stable, reliable option here. Only downside, obviously, is that we don't have a ton of touchdown equity with him. He's got 1 on the year. We're depending on that volume for him. But the good thing is that the volume that we had been seeing out of him was very much so a borderline tight end 1 scenario. So he can get you there. He can be a safe option. I do feel like given the matchup, and regardless of the injury situation, we are going to see more volume pushed towards him because it just aligns perfectly that way. And with all of the injuries that we have going on here, Dissly is pushing up again, just like we were talking about there with Will Levis. He is pushing up to a borderline tight end 1.
That's where we've got him ranked right now in the Yahoo consensus rankings. He's tight end 12, so he's right on that line there. And I think that's important because there's not a ton of great tight ends generally, but there's not a ton of great tight ends on bye this week. It's Denver, it's Indianapolis, a bunch of committees there. Maybe you've been streaming the Zach Ertz's or the Hunter Henrys or the Dalton Schultz, but maybe you're a Mark Andrews manager and you need somebody this week. Will Dissly right now is still only rostered 2% of Yahoo leagues, so widely available. Love the call on him as a pretty good matchup flyer there. I know I myself have a Will Dissly team that I'm kind of debating between him and like Cade Otton this week. And those guys are kind of similarly ranked right now. So I haven't quite made a final decision yet on which way I'm going to go. But some of your notes there on Will Dissly definitely might be pushing me towards that Chargers matchup here. This next one, Tara, I'm also uncomfortably invested in what you're going to say because nice. I have mentioned this team already previously on the week. I've got a Cortland Sutton, Michael Pittman team that's like a 3 wide receiver league, and we've got one glaring spot, and it just the other guys are like Jaden Reed and stuff like that. The dudes they're already kind of like locked in. So I do not have a good replacement for this wide receiver spot. Bad planning by your boy. I spent all my fab on Isaac Guerendo, who we're going to actually talk about in a little bit. So I had to just go for the cheapie. Picked up Brandon Cooks, who's the next player / Kevontae Turpin you want to talk about here, Tara. So again, personally invested in what you're about to say here. What do you have to throw out here on Brandon Cooks and some of these Cowboys depth receivers?
Well, for you personally, Matt, we're going to speak positively on the opportunity here for these guys. We won't bury.
Well, only do it if that's what you were going to do originally. Do not be afraid to come on the show, Tara, and look me right in the eye across the recording here and say, Harmon, you're an idiot, and it's going to go really poorly for you. I think that might actually help me, honestly.
No, it's got to be good. I mean, when I put Cooks and Turpin up there, I must feel good about something here. So
something, not someone, something.
And maybe it's not that I feel super good about them as players, although I do feel good about Kevontae Turpin. I mean, he's talented, and Brandon Cooks, he's had his days. But really, it's the matchup here. Cincinnati's defense, unfortunately, is just, I feel so bad for Joe Burrow. It's not right. It's not fair. But I do think that Cooper Rush can perform against the Cincinnati defense here. Oddly enough, he's rising up the rankings too. Not to the point where we're, saying, hey, Cooper Rush for sure, but in deeper leagues and, super flex, you can desperately make that heat for the potential upside in this matchup for sure. But the Cowboys have really leaned on the run game here. And I think that this is still a good opportunity for Rico Dowdle, but it's just as equal an opportunity for some of these secondary options behind CeeDee Lamb to step up here. I think there is the possibility here. And when you're looking across the board in what they did last week, I feel like we kind of have to take a little bit of a leap of faith here, because last week was down in terms of these guys having value from a fantasy perspective for sure. But if you look at it and say, you can make the argument and say, well, they didn't play significant snaps. This might have been a blip where they're not going to be someone we can turn to. That was a random Brandon Cooks touchdown. We can't trust it. Is Kevontae Turpin really going to get 5 targets again? I kind of think so, especially given the matchup. But looking at Brandon Cooks last week, we have to know that him coming off of that injury, that is not indicative of the level of usage that we will see as he continues to ramp up and continues to be increased within this offense here. I think we're going to see a pretty decent jump in terms of his presence on the field. And despite the low presence on the field, it was really good to see that they were very intentional about his usage in terms of targets. And were they highly productive from a yardage perspective? No. But again, not the most ideal situation. Now this week, against Cincinnati, we can absolutely turn that direction, in my opinion. We also look at Turpin, seeing a little bit of a bump there in snaps. I feel like this one is the one where we have to take even more of a leap of faith, that Dallas is looking at this offense and saying, maybe us trying to force Jonathan Mingo to work in some way, shape, or form isn't the right direction for us to try and justify that trade there. We've tried with Jalen Tolbert, and he's okay, but is he really a difference maker? Probably not. But they do know that Turpin is an electric difference maker type of person. When you get him, when the ball is in his hand, he makes magic happen. So why not try to increase his utilization within the offense and take advantage of his skill set? So as we start to get further in the season, we start to see a little bit more experimentation. I think that he can have fantasy relevance as well in the right matchups here. So it might seem a little bit uncomfortable to turn here to Cooper Rush's second and third options, but I think both of these guys have, viable play. Now, if I'm in a regular league and, trying to look at between the two, it's Brandon Cooks that I would definitely turn to. I think he's the one that would be the secondary option in terms of targets. He's the one that's had, is looking at past years, more red zone usage as well. So Cooks is the one that I feel safer with. And then Turpin would be the one in deeper leagues that you're turning to and saying, I need a little bit of a Hail Mary here. But quite frankly, when we're looking at the various leagues that people are in, it's such a wild week in terms of all the talented receivers that are on a bye this week. So I can see a reality where you got to turn to one of these guys and you can feel a little bit better about it because there is some potential upside here.
No, I dig it. And it comes down to the matchup, right, with this Bengals defense, which, gives it up in every which way. But if you're trying to break some ties here, the Bengals are 5th in yards per game allowed to outside receivers. They're about 14th in yards allowed to slot receivers. And if you look at last week, might not be the full indication of what we're going to get, but Cooks was almost exclusively an outside receiver. Turpin he didn't run a single route from the outside. It was all slot backfield stuff, the gadgety type receiver thing. When look, he's got a lot of juice. I think they should continue to try to maybe mix him in a little bit on offense and see what they can get out of there. But Jake Ferguson's going to be back. He's out of the concussion protocol, so the Luke Schoonmaker stuff is probably over. And Schoonmaker was mostly a slot player for them as well, in addition to running a lot of routes, obviously from the inline position. So I'm with you that I think the safer play here, if you're just trying to, hey, let me land on an 8-point game, let me go with Brandon Cooks, I think is probably the right answer here. But if you're in a truly desperate spot, I don't think Turpin is, completely ridiculous to play here. Hope this turns into like a big points affair. Obviously, Rico Dowdle, great matchup too. 68% of the carries the last 2 weeks and going against the Bengals defense. That should be pretty fun. Speaking of desperation plays at wide receiver, maybe it's disrespectful for me to tee this up for you to talk about Parker Washington that way, considering what he did last week. But Parker Washington, your final name here in Make or Break.
No, it's good to point out because I don't want people to feel like this is reactionary to like, oh my gosh, he's breaking out and can. No, that's not it. It's that it's a realistic pivot because he has shown that he is increased in terms of snap count, specifically when Gabe Davis is out. So if you're trying to make that correlation and saying Gabe Davis out, we should see a decent amount of snaps, a decent amount of targets, to Parker Washington, there is a correlation here. There's a logical reason as to why he broke out last week, particularly. And also because, again, extending those logical reasons, Houston's secondary was probably a little bit more vulnerable after Azeez Al-Shaair got ejected. So everything probably, because we kind of saw that increase in overall defensive upside and them being a more difficult matchup when he came back into the lineup there. So them kind of falling apart without him does make a little bit of sense there. So I think that kind of played a bit of a role into it too. So when you're looking at that, you're saying, okay, we've got Gabe Davis out. We want a good matchup, and Tennessee is a potentially intriguing matchup. And then another aspect to that as well, kind of what we were kind of talking about earlier with Will Levis. This is a game where this should be a very close matchup for both quarterbacks to be able to benefit. If we've got more of a neutral game script, we can see a better Will Levis and a better Mac Jones in a situation where they're not panicking and trying to chuck the ball and trying to catch up. This is not expected to be a high points affair, but it is expected to be close. So if we've got this close little matchup here, we're not looking for massive upside, but a realistic opportunity for both of these guys to make smarter choices here. And if Mac Jones is able to make smarter choices in a closer game, Parker Washington can benefit as the secondary option there behind Brian Thomas. We did see an uptick in volume for Brian Thomas, but we do know that he's never been really a massive target hog in that offense. And we've seen inconsistency in terms of the usage towards Evan Ingram. So it's not as if it's going to be aggressively tilted towards one player. They can go 3 deep in terms of viable fantasy options if the matchup is the right situation here. And we've had some little generous games, especially in the back half of the season here, where the Titans have been giving up decent volume to opposing quarterbacks and good volume to fantasy relevant receivers there. So while this on the surface doesn't feel like a matchup where we want to be targeting multiple players here, there is a little bit of upside here for Parker Washington.
I liked Parker Washington coming into the league. I thought he was like a nice like day 3 sleeper prospect. I thought you could see some kind of like poor man's Golden Tate in his game as a slot receiver, because he was aggressive after the catch, had really good hands, he could win in tight coverage. And I thought he gave really good effort in the blocking game. I can see why coaches like him. And he's worked his way onto the field. I mean, the last 2 games, the targets have gone 17 to Brian Thomas, 15 to Evan Ingram, 15 to Parker Washington. And I would assume that he is that he profiled as a slot receiver, but over the last 2 weeks, Tera, he's only run like 35% of his routes from the slot, as you mentioned, more so actually replacing Gabe Davis on the outside, while they've tried to work in like Devin Duvernay and obviously Evan Ingram as a slot receiver as well. So it looks like Brian Thomas may be getting a little bit more X receiver work with Gabe Davis out there, and then Parker Washington, they might trust to be that flanker in 2 receiver sets. So that's good news for him. I can't believe we're talking about like multiple potential sleepers from this Jaguar, Mac Jones versus damn Will Levis, Calvin Ridley revenge game. There's a lot of storylines for a game that I think most of America will not watch here.
Yeah, it's 2 bad teams, and sometimes you have to be careful because it doesn't always pan out the way. But 2 bad teams, 2 bad defenses, sometimes a little bit of magic can happen, and it's a kind of negative scenario there from a fantasy perspective. So don't put it past these guys to still play messy. For all we know, this could be one of those games or those fun games, like a Jameis Winston game, where the defense can eat, the offense can eat. It's all fun. We get turnovers and pick six and opportunities on the ground and touchdowns. So I don't want to hype this game up. But there is some little fantasy viability here for these teams.
You don't want to hype this game up, but you don't want to not hype this game up.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Exactly.
Yeah. What a world. AFC South, a little meaningless battle here at the end of the season. With that, let's bring it home as we always do. Let's toss it to our keys to winning, presented by Toyota, the official automotive partner of the NFL. And for week 14, our key to winning is, really, for real, trying to pick you the right players to start and make the difference in your flex spot, because this is the big one. You got to win and in. Playoffs are here. like I said, the pressure is on. So Tera, give me your key to winning player for week 14.
My key to winning player is Isaac Guerendo, because it is yet again time to dive headfirst into the 49ers backfield, as we have done over and over and over again. Every time they have a new RB1, is it the system? Is it that they draft extra talented running backs? It doesn't matter from a fantasy perspective. We care about the points, and this week's matchup is the perfect setup for Isaac Guerendo to offer RB1 upside here. The Chicago defense has been vulnerable to the run all season long. And the good thing here about that Chicago defense is that it doesn't require receiving upside to get you there, because Guerendo doesn't offer that. We want an opportunity where running backs are thriving specifically on the ground. And Chicago has been known to give up yardage throughout the entire season. In his limited usage, Guerendo has averaged 5.9 yards per carry. So with a good 15 to 20 touches, he can absolutely hit that 100-yard mark and be a very strong flex play in his first career start.
I like it a lot. Explosive. He fits that outside zone scheme that Shanahan obviously has gotten a little bit away from, but still has a master's degree in. So I really like Guerendo here. I have to personally start Isaac Guerendo. Let's stick on the rookie running back train. And I'm going to talk about rookie running back, New York Giants, Tyron Tracy. Tyron Tracy, maybe he frustrated coaches on the staff there between those 3 fumbles between week 10 and week 12, some pretty costly ones. But if he did, Tera was not reflected in his playing time on Thanksgiving. He played 73% of the snaps, which is his highest in a game with Devin Singletary active. He also had his highest route participation in a game with Devin Singletary active. So the playing time was there, even if the fantasy results weren't. And look, like, this guy needs to get touches here towards the end of the season, because he's looked really good when he's got the opportunity. He looks explosive. I think he's looked more advanced as a rusher than maybe you would think for a converted wide receiver. Seeing what the Giants have in Tracy and kind of working through these mistakes, it's the only thing that really makes sense. Even if this staff isn't going to be back next year, there's got to be a priority to continue to showcase a guy that was a day 3 pick for them and looks like a pretty, maybe not a home run, but certainly looks like a hit. I think he's going to remain the RB1 of this backfield, and that's great news for this week. He draws a matchup in week 14 with a Saints team that ranks 28th in EPA, rushing EPA allowed since week 8. I think this game, Saints probably aren't going to blow out the Giants or anything like that. The run should remain in play. And even honestly, if it's not, the fact that Tracy is continuing to get those routes and continuing to get that passing game work, passing down work at the very least, is pretty critical to his fantasy floor. So I think he is someone you can confidently flex. I've got him ranked as a top 15 running back here this week. And with that, Tera, we did it. Week 14. Yes. I mean, I don't know how many playoff spots you're sweating, anything like that. I've got some seeding to worry about this week, but good luck to you and all your teams this week.
Appreciate it. We're pushing through. I feel good about it. Just one little hurdle here, and we'll be sailing right into the fantasy playoffs in a few things. So all good. Yeah,
which certainly no stress when it comes to the fantasy postseason. Absolutely a real breeze there. Good luck to everybody out there as you try to secure that fantasy playoff spot, or if you already punched your ticket to the fantasy postseason, which if you did, shout out to you. Good luck just improving your seeding and, maybe making one more person look stupid on your way to a fantasy postseason run. That is going to do it for today. Thanks again to Toyota, the official automotive partner of the NFL. Next time you hear from us, Week 14 Sunday is going to be in the books, and Andy Behrens will be right back here to break it all down with me. Until then, we are out.